Today's presentations are focused on catastrophic injury, including new initiatives in Queensland and key lessons from other jurisdictions related to research and environmental, legal, economic and policy considerations relevant to the NIIS. And what we've done is we've put together an expert panel with different areas of expertise that are particularly relevant to the MVA NIIS. And I'll just introduce them and get them to talk for briefly. I think I was limited to 25 words and went well and truly over that in the last panel discussion, but if you could be mindful of that limit, just indicate how your area of research is relevant to the MVA NIIS. So I'll just introduce the panel and then we'll go one at a time to introduce each other individually. So Mr. Neil Singleton, who you all already know, Professor Michele Foster, who chaired the last panel, who's the Chair of Disability and Rehabilitation Research at Griffith University and the Division of Rehabilitation, Metro South Health and MACE, so has a joint chair. Professor Lesley Chenoweth, Pro Vice-Chancellor and Head of Logan Campus at Griffith University. Dr. Donna McDonald, who's the Senior Research Fellow in the School of Home and Human Services and Social Work at Griffith University, and Dr. Carolyn Ehrlich, who's Senior Research Fellow also in the School of Human Services and Social Work at Griffith University. So will I start out with you, Lesley, because you're down the end of the table and we'll work our way this way.
So in 25 words. Most of my work has been in the disability area, so much more focused on long-term family and supports for people with a disability around economic and social participation. Most recently, though, we've been working on the rollout of the NDIS and what do those sorts of models mean for people with disabilities, for families, and for the service sector.
Well, my research, really, I'm a health and disability researcher. I concentrate particularly on the intersection of policy and service systems and how that impacts on individual and family lives and experiences. And recent research, I've looked at family unit analysis of living with disability and how they use and expend resources to create opportunities in that respect.
Hi. I'm a policy generalist by nature. Most of my professional life in the area of social policy, in the area of disability, health and the arts. My immediate research priority at the moment is looking at the interaction of the NDIS as it's being rolled out with clients of a leading community-based organisation. My concurrent interest is in the role of creative art, the visual art, performance art and the like, intersecting with disability, health and well-being.
So the bulk of my research is in the areas of complexity and integration. So I'm looking at how people integrate people with complex health needs integrate with complex systems. And most recently, my work has been in the area of mental health service provision, which is a little different from this audience, but the work that I do translates to catastrophic injury because it's around integration and complexity.
Well, my focus is probably the strategic management of the CTP scheme, and that includes how you reduce the incidence and effects of road trauma, and more lately it's expanded into the policy work around supporting the government consideration of the NIIS.
Okay, so we have quite a few questions that link into the existing areas of expertise of our panel members. But firstly, I'd just like to ask a general question to the panel, and that's a lot of you are researchers with a keen interest in the lived experience of disability and how different systems and processes impact on people with disability. So what I'd like to ask is, what real difference do you think an MVA NIIS could make to the lives of people with catastrophic injury in Queensland and their families?
Anybody? Well, I think you could take a short-term and a longer-term view of this. I think in the short term, we're probably not going to see a big positive impact. I think there'll be a lot of confusion if we can draw on the experience of the NDIS. But some of the things that I think are really important about a scheme like this are, firstly, that this will actually facilitate earlier intervention And I think that's really, really key. All the research would tell us that. And the earlier we can actually respond and fund and get on board, the better. And also within these both those schemes are those central principles of choice and of control. And when done well and really supported to happen, that will have a really positive impact for people with disabilities and families.
I think that, Michele. I think that given that Neil mentioned the Greenfield start, that presents an incredible opportunity to start with something new. Innovation is a mantra. We've got a really good opportunity now to actually start with something new and start with the person with disability, start with their family and work our way forward from that starting point rather than starting with expert and backtracking, retrofitting.
I think if a scheme can assure individuals and families that, you know, basic needs will be met, that they have certainty of that and they have certainty of how they navigate systems, that will make a tremendous difference. The personalised approach is going to be important. Individuals and families want flexibility and they want a system to move with them. They don't want to have to, be plugged into a system. So there's huge potential if this system, if such a scheme can deliver truly personalised care, because inherent in that should be the flexibility to move with people's changing needs over time.
And I guess similar to what Michelle's saying there is that I think that one of the real differences that it makes is that ability to reduce the fragmentation that's happening prior to entry into care delivery systems. So if the NIIS can bring together what's currently a very fragmented approach at injury time, I think that would be very beneficial.
Okay. Neil, do you want to have a track at that, or can I go with the next question, which is to you? Okay. All right. So enabling choice and control and co-production of services is a major policy driver in current disability and aged care reform. However, effective injury management calls for timely and coordinated access to a broad range of services and support, often at times when an individual with catastrophic injury has limited capacity to exercise informed choice. So the question I'd like to ask you is, what is the current and future role of regulators like MACE in developing effective injury management systems, including rehabilitation, for people with catastrophic injury? And how could an MVA NIIS support the role of consumer choice in the genesis of these systems?
I think it's important, we're going to distinguish the role of MACE as a regulator of the CTP scheme and the NIIS, which will be a service provider. They will be separate bodies, so the NIIS won't be regulated by MACE. I can't see any structure that would entertain that sort of outcome. But MACE's role will be very much around integrating the NIIS and the existing CTP scheme, because in some instances people will have claims on both systems. And it would be, I guess, a terrible stress to be trying to navigate across two schemes. And sadly, we've heard stories already out of New South Wales where different stakeholder groups, for different reasons, try to push people backwards and forwards across the two schemes. So if you're NIIS eligible, they try and keep you out of the NIIS into the CTP scheme, and vice versa in terms of insurers trying to lower their costs, lawyers maybe trying to keep you in a lump sum system where they can maximise their costs. There's all sorts of different, I guess, surprising dynamics that can arise in that sort of system. And I think the benefit of having the NIIS within an insurance commission environment, and we do this already with the nominal defendant scheme where we effectively manage what is a licensed insurer, is understand how that dynamic works across the different stakeholders and the role you have to play in looking at the injured person's well-being and the outcome. So I think that's going to be a critical element. In the CTP scheme today, injured people have choice already. They choose their provider and they choose the modality of the treatment that they go through. Whether people make an informed choice is probably a function of where they land in the system and whether they land with an educated person as their advisor, whether that's a lawyer, their GP, or a family member. That's the unknown. That's the difficult part of these systems. So where do they get their evidence or information from to start off on their journey of, they were doing nothing wrong, were injured in a car crash, and next thing they know they're in a foreign system, they don't know what to do next. And you hear stories of GPs turning people away because they've got a compensable claim. So you've got to go doctor shopping, find someone who will treat you, who will refer you. You go from referral to referral, and then you get into the medico-legal system. All of that, that's the real world that we live in today, but that all occurs in a world where people have their own individual choice. I guess that's a simplistic response would be people have choice today. The reality is we understand the complexity in effecting that choice, and that's where that communication piece will be so crucial around how we have a system that integrates. So from the moment someone lands in either the Townsville Hospital, Gold Coast or PA Hospital, what happens next and what happens after that is going to be vital. And we've got to make sure all of that works really well.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. We're actually going to talk a little bit more about informed choice later in the discussion. So for people with catastrophic injury, they often have very complex care needs and frequently require services and support from multiple service providers. And we did talk about that a little bit in the last panel. And those service providers are often across different service sectors and required at different times. Carolyn, I'd like to ask you the question, because your background's in integrated care and integrating responses to people with complex care needs. What are some of the challenges to delivering timely and integrated care for people with catastrophic injury in Queensland? And what role could an MVA NIIS play in that?
Okay, thanks, Ros. I think that some of the things that strike me is that within, I guess, lots of different complex areas, but especially in the area of catastrophic injury, is that these people are accessing multiple different systems, multiple different service providers, as you say, and yet we've got a requirement to provide people with essential but person-centred or individualised care. So the challenge then is actually how you might do that. And if I think about integration in terms of clinical outcomes, then there's work that's been done, but suggests that you need to have a look at what's happening with the clinicians and how they're working with people to provide them with the best outcomes that they can get, but how those clinicians are supported within organisations, and then how those organisations are supported within systems in ways that and that across all of those areas there needs to be information that's gathered and provided so that people can have access across systems and across organisations and across professions to the same type of information and to make decisions that support individuals. So the challenge then is, and we've heard this morning about things like different benchmarks, different outcomes, different points of view, and so I think that one of the things that the NIIS is going to be able to do, I would hope, is to, with a relatively small number of people on a per annum basis, get some very clear information and some clear guidance about how what outcomes are being measured, what outcomes need to be measured, and I guess informing care as it goes along and being able to provide a lot more information, I guess, to integrate care across each one of those sectors. And I think that some of the really important things are going to be about having the common vision and how they share, and how the common vision for the outcomes for these people is shared across all of the different sectors and individuals and organisations.
Anybody else want to comment on that?
That whole thing about how do we work across systems and integrate, like we like people in this room that are younger than me have been doing that for decades. And it is a really wicked problem, and I think it's going to take real resolve to bring that together. So I think we have to think about what are the most effective ways of achieving that kind of integration. And it seems to me that starting with the people first is one way of doing it. I think you could look at focusing on a place-based approach. But of course, for this area, which is statewide, that's much, much harder. But we're already grappling with this with the NDIS, and we haven't even started in Queensland. So already we're doing a symposium with Lady Salento Children's Hospital. They're already thinking, how are we going to do this with children with complex health needs who also have disabilities, who will be eligible under the NDIS, and how is all that going to work?
I think you've got to also have sympathetic systems at a system level, though, because one of the issues with saying, you know, at a sort of micro, even organisational level, that we all want to do this, but you can have conflicting messages that impact systems, like performance, for instance, and what drives performance of different sectors and different providers and different services. And unless they all line up, then people are going to be focused on meeting performance in their system. So they all have to sing in harmony.
The same page.
I think the word harmony, picking up on Lesley and Michele, the word harmony is a good segue. I mean, we can talk about systems endlessly, that IT system, performance systems, and all sorts of systems. But whatever the system, it's us, it's you, it's people. And no amount of systematising is going to make us robotic and fit in neatly like widgets and gadgets and the like. We have to always come back to us, to you, the collective. So it's, regardless of the system, all the time we have to reflect and remember it's interrelational, it's about people, about harmony, about respect, keep those person-centred values. There's no magic bullet for the system. Like Lesley, I've been around for a very long time.
That's a really nice segue into case management, and I was going to ask you, Lesley, about case management, because arguably case managers can help people navigate systems so that they do deliver person-centred responses. So case management's an important component of rehabilitation after catastrophic injury, and good case management can actually empower people to take on responsibility and control of their recovery. However, under an insurance framework, case managers often have to balance multiple stakeholder interests, including not just the client, but also their own employer and insurer and the client's legal representative and family. So I'd like to ask you, what model of case management would enable empowerment of people with catastrophic injury while balancing the interests of the different stakeholders involved under an MVA NIIS? It's a curly question.
And I wish I had a slick, lovely, simple answer. But I think the models of case management will really depend on the kind of system that we end up with. And I'm still not clear what that's going to look like for the NIIS. Because inevitably, and it's not just case managers, anyone working in the systems, and we've just been talking about this, will inevitably be captured or influenced by all those other competing demands. Well, you've got to keep the costs down. Oh, well, no, we've got all this choice, but now because of this, there's going to be a reduced choice. And so even as practitioners, we face this, these constraints. So I think it really is going to depend on, you know, will it be a no-fault system ultimately, and how will that work with a case management model? I think what's really important to me though is that certainly being across the system certainly helps people navigate the system, and that's really a very important role of case managers, because people haven't, you know, how do you know what is the choice or what's going to happen next? But I think we really have to look at what are the kinds of safeguards that we put in place around those, supporting those case managers to be clear about, well, what are we all on the same page? Is this primarily, it has to be about the outcome for the person and the family, That has to be first and foremost. And that will require, I think, real safeguards to maintain that. I'm a bit cynical, I'm sorry.
Speaking of safeguards, does anybody else want to add to that? No? Donna, you've done a lot of work around choice and informed choice and how we can support people who have cognitive impairments to exercise informed choice. And I guess one of the safeguards in any system is ensuring that people can make informed choices. What can we learn about current research around how to support informed choice for those people who perhaps have cognitive impairment and may have some barriers to exercising informed choice, and how can we get around some of those issues?
Yeah, I've spent a couple of weeks pondering this question, and I've started to reframe the question. So the issues around, there's an assumption that people with catastrophic injury may experience long-term cognitive or communication impairment, which limit their opportunity to exercise informed choice. So that was the underpinning assumption, which limit their opportunity for informed choice. Now, there are two issues there for me. One is, who's doing the limiting? Who's doing the limiting of that informed choice? We are all limited in some way or other. It's just that with some of us, the limitations are more pronounced than others. Sometimes people can't understand me because of the way I speak. I've got a deaf voice, I've got a speech impairment, and so on and so forth. So where are the limits coming from? People impatient to take their time to understand me, or the fact that I can't say the sibilants very well. So it's a balance, it's a harmony. There's a harmony that needs to happen when we think about limit. Who's imposing the limit? The second thing that I've learned as a result of doing this project with a community-based organisation, it's very important to make sure that the tail's not wagging the dog. The tail in this particular instance is informed choice. People have fallen in love with this notion of informed choice and choice of control, and the mantra for the NDIS, and rightfully so, but we need to be mindful that the notion of informed choice is simply a process to what Lesley and Michele and Carolyn and others of you in the room have constantly been reminding us of, about the quality of life outcomes. And there are many elements to quality of life. Informed choice is just one element. There are many elements, love, relationship, there are many elements to a quality of life. So it's important that we don't fall in love with the legislative principle of informed choice, and that's why I'm referring before to this being a greenfield site for the NIIS, NIIS, whatever. They all have an S in them, so bad. So it's a greenfield site, and it's an opportunity for, with respect for Neil, to take this up and say, yes, we are in love with informed choice and control, but we're in love with other measures as well. How we can support the development of NIIS in Queensland is by engaging with Neil's work closely, not critically, as friendly allies, and sharing and encouraging the input of families and the family members who are suffering catastrophic injury. What are the lessons for an MBA, NIA, whatever? I think that it's a greenfield site for Queensland, for Neil and his team to be teaching. We don't know the lessons yet from the NDIS, but we do know one perennial lesson, and it's ever been thus: listen to the families and listen to the person with disability. I think Neil has an opportunity to create a terrific product here, whereby people are turning to him and saying, teach us something.
A lot of weight on your shoulders, Neil. Okay, Just going now to the role of families, because you've talked about how important it is to involve families in that discussion and into the design of an MBA NIIS and what's important for people. The MBA NIIS, and this question's for you, Michele. Michele was my thesis supervisor, so I like throwing her curly questions. She had a lot from me throughout my PhD. The MBA NIIS and NDIS minimum benchmarks specify that reasonable and necessary support reflect community expectations, including what is realistic to expect from the individual, family and carers, which could be a point of contention depending on your point of view and where you sit in the system, I guess. What are the considerations and tensions here?
I mean, I do remember when the first proposals came out around the NDIS, and written in the proposals was this statement about and what can be reasonably expected of families, and that really alarm bells started going off for me, and I thought, well, how do you determine that? So, I mean, in social policy and public policy, determining the principles that frame the policy are always challenging because you've got such diverse interests and what we've heard today. And so, you know, we're trying to create a fair system, you know, a cost-beneficial system, an effective system, one that has choice and control. And sometimes these principles obviously can be at odds. And a lot of times values determine what principles take priority. And it's why policy can't be overly prescriptive. Policy remains abstract for this reason, because it is so challenging. But the danger with that too then is left to the front line to determine, and then those things become, you know, the problem in themselves. They become very difficult. I remember doing research years ago at the University of York about the difficulty of implementing personalised care and the difficulties for frontline workers trying to interpret those sorts of principles without good guidance. So that's a policy problem. So ideally with families, what you want to do is to base your allocation of resources on a good awareness of the diversity of families and the needs of families, understanding them in terms of their life stage, their demographics, their geography, their cultural complexity. All of those sorts of things are ideal. Now that's the next problem. That's the data problem. We don't have enough understanding of family profiles, and we heard Luke earlier talk about, you know, trying to get an understanding, you know, of profiles of populations and understanding how they use resources and the costs that are involved. So that's a data problem. So here we've got an abstract principle that Neil certainly picked up on in terms of reasonable and necessary. Well, if you take them separately, necessarily implies that something's necessary for some reason. So if you took that in a medical term, then you're saying that this is vital, this is necessary, based on what? Evidence? Cost? What is it? If you put the principle reasonable with it, then it suggests there's a limit to what is necessary. So, you know, we run that together, but if you divide those two terms and say, well, what do they mean? They're in conflict. So in terms of working out what is reasonable and necessary, we've got to think about scope, we've got to think about quantity, and the other tension is the difference between the individual's needs and wishes and the family's needs and wishes. And we've seen that a lot in the mental health area, you know, the consumer rights, family rights, and so forth. I mean, the research I've done on families suggests that, you know, by and large, they have reasonable, pockets of adequate care, but it's very precarious and it's held up by a lot of family input. Yep. So, you know, we need to understand that better. And we also know that some families have a lot of leverage. So, you know, and other families don't. And that leverage is wealth, but it's also skills and other sorts of capabilities. So trying to operationalise a principle like that in terms of families is not going to be easy. But I certainly think, I mean, my answer to everything is more research, but I certainly think we do need that, and we need to understand from the family perspective, and that is not going to be easy research. That takes long-term view, and it's and trying to get across all of the systems to look at families in context.
Great answer. Anybody else like to add to that? No.
I just remember some years ago, Michele, you and I were at some workshop where they were going to set a research agenda for disability, and we talked about that very thing, that real need for longitudinal work in this area, because then we'd understand better the profile of families and the family's journey and people's life trajectories. We need that.
So that leads in very well to the next question, which any of you can answer, which is how can we use technology to promote improved outcomes for people with catastrophic injury and their families, and how could an MVA NIIS support this? Well, I see connections there. I hope you guys see connections there.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Yes.
What are you meaning by technology?
Yeah.
I mean, we talk about technology of choice, we talk about technology,
Assistive
to
technology,
be more
data
participative.
analytics.
I mean,
All of it, actually. Like,
technology of service delivery, we do need all of it.
yep.
I've got the answer.
Okay.
Only because I was talking with one of my colleagues at lunchtime, Emily Steele, and Emily's an OT and she's very experienced and knowledgeable in the area of technology, assistive technology, the whole gamut. And the key point is about making sure that we work with the person who's had the injury right from the ready, set, go. We assess their need, talk with them, talk to their family right from the ready, set, go, rather than make it an add-on as they're leaving the hospital in the cab with their suitcase. So the issue is about integrating all the tools we've got at our disposal, including technology right from the ready, set, go. Nothing retrofitted.
I think
Have I said that right,
yeah.
Emily?
But the other issue with technology, Ros, is to do with, picks up on something Neil talked about, is the information communication.
absolutely.
And I mean, if we're talking, and you know, I was serious when I said information technology of choice.
Yep.
You know, so how can technology be used for populations to actually make choice real? So
There's also the issue of cost, isn't there?
issue of cost, yeah. Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
But certainly people's accessibility, you know, using technology in a way that allows them to access information, to be, I was nearly going to say informed, to be informed, but to actually look at options and to be able to understand, you know, systems, that can be very empowering and promoting outcomes.
So, sorry, keep going.
I mean, I think I just had a look at what's been happening with the rollout of the NDIS in other states, and I think almost half the participants have some assistive technology component in their package. Now, that's really high. That's, I think, a lot of people. And I think certainly some of that technology has provided a much more cost-effective tool of communication, for example, than what we used to do in the old days, when you used to have 3 Lions clubs in a Rotary running car washes to fund one child to get a Canon communicator. That's been a really positive impact. But I really like this idea of the technologies of how people make choices, and how some of our colleagues, we've talked about, well, what we need is TripAdvisor for disability services and support, so that consumers can have input, as well as, you know, just people putting up what they do.
Well, we're already doing work in that area, aren't we, at Griffith?
Yeah, we are.
So Griffith University's research team's been working with Endeavour Foundation on developing a web-based tool to help people work through their way, making choices and finding their way to different services, and now at the stage of being developed as an app. A lot of work is already being done. Excellent work and very exciting work. I guess it's a matter of, you know, it's a horse for courses. You know, we can fall in love with something and want to do it everywhere that all the time it has to be a customized approach, doesn't it?
So it sounds like having technology that has the flexibility to enable choice, enable decision making, but also support independence through assistive technologies, communication, quite a number of different areas. Yep. Okay, we're just about coming to a close. I've got one more question, though it is actually 3:30. Is anybody burning to leave the room? Can I ask one more question? Okay, one more question. What are the major challenges to delivering the MBA NIIS in Queensland, and how can we best respond to these? Anybody? Neil?
I think it's important that, with respect, that people like Lesley and I don't feel daunted and overwhelmed by what we've experienced in the past, and that we maintain a freshness of enthusiasm for what's possible.
Yep.
And I think in that way we need to be creating a space for the young people to be stepping in and helping keep up that enthusiasm and optimism for what's possible.
Yep. Very true.
I think you've identified there's lots of challenges. Being very narrow about the NIIS, the challenge I see is we're up against the NDIS.
Yeah.
Everyone talks about it, it's massive, it's big, it's going to hit Queensland. Just looking at service providers, trying to attract service providers into the NIIS, small scheme, geographically diverse, when you're up against a large scheme that will be consuming resources like we've never seen before. For all of the goodwill in the world, the NIIS may not get off to a great start because we just simply cannot deliver on the promise. And that's the challenge I think we're going to have to work through how we overcome.
So that might be a challenge for some of the people in this room at the moment. Yeah. Okay, Heidi, did you want to close? Yes? Okay, thank you very much. Could I just get everyone to have a round of applause? Thank you very much. Lots of food for thought there.